Hi, everyone. My name is Joe Kelly. I am the Community Relations Program host at the Rochester Hills Public Library. I'm here to welcome you to this evening's program, Author Talk. This Author Talk program, Her Three Lies, with Cate Holahan. That's right?
Right.
Okay. I was just second guessing myself. Please join us next Tuesday at June 15th at 7 p.m. for our next Author Talk program, The Audacity of Sarah Grayson with Joni Elliott, about her debut contemporary fiction novel. We will leave time for questions throughout this program. We're actually going to take, by the host request, just a more conversational approach. If anybody has a question, feel free to type it into the chat. The participants will remain muted, but I'll moderate those questions and ask them to our gracious host here. And whenever you have a question, just leave it in the chat and we'll answer them throughout the program. The program itself will be recorded. It'll be available on YouTube about 1 week from tonight. So with that, it'll also be on rhpl.org. But with that, please join me in welcoming our host tonight, Cate Holahan.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here at the Rochester Public Library. Very excited to join you all, and thank you for coming. I know we all have lots of stuff that we could be doing, and that we're all a little zoomed out, so I appreciate you showing up. So what I wanted to talk about is some writing advice that is often given and how I interpret it. So people often say, write what you know. And I take a different spin on that. I say, write what you fear. And part of that is because I'm a thriller author. So it goes, with my genre, but also because for me, what makes writing so interesting is when you can tell that the author is engaged with their subject matter and has learned about it and is excited about it. And so in writing thrillers, what I try to do is I look at something that's bothering me, something that's giving me anxiety. And then I try and think of what would be a good story around that allows me to delve into the subject matter and really explore it in a way that I think is interesting and also kind of satisfies my own desire to confront that fear and hopefully other people's desires to confront fear, because that's something I think we all share. We have these mutual fears. And then resolve it, which is the great thing you can do in fiction, right? Is that I can make a happy ending at the end of it and we all kind of feel satisfied and we have that catharsis. So with my new book, Her Three Lives, which is right here, it's my fifth domestic suspense. What was concerning me at the time was my relationship with all of the technology in my life and how I felt it was encroaching on my privacy, and I didn't even kind of realize it was happening. And how it really started, I'll tell you a funny story, was my kids. I had all these Nest cams, all of these, the smart home devices, the Ring doorbells and the Nest cams and the Amazon and the Google Assistants, and I had all of this stuff. And I loved it. It made my life so convenient. Hey, Google, play me a song, order me something from Amazon, whatever I wanted. And of course, they all listen to you and they're always constantly recording. And one of these days, my kids got into an argument. And so I found myself saying to them as they were going, well, she did it first. No, she did it. And I said, well, I don't have to guess here. I can go to the tape. And then I thought, oh, geez, that's going to cause some psychological damage, right? I'm telling my children that every act that they commit is recorded. And I, as the authoritarian figure here, can go to the tape and decide who's right and who's wrong. It seemed very Minority Report to me. So I ended up kind of wanting to explore, well, what was my relationship with this technology? And am I abusing it? And so that was really the genesis for this book, Her Three Lives, which tells the story of Greg Hamlin. He is a 52-year-old successful architect who is embarking on this next chapter of his life after separating from his wife of 20 years and raising their children who are now adults together. And he meets Jade Thompson, who is a 32-year-old would-be interior designer who has a successful blog about Caribbean culture, food, and design. And when they meet, they're going to start this new chapter of their lives, and then it's interrupted cruelly by a home invasion, during which Greg is hit over the head with a crowbar and suffers a traumatic brain injury. And so when he comes back from the hospital, and he's still severely injured and he's recovering, he's trying to secure his home, and he installs all of these smart devices, all of these Nest cams and these doorbell cameras and all of these assistants, in order to help himself feel more safe. And as he's glued to all of these live feeds, he starts inadvertently spying on his fiance. And then as he gets more and more concerned, more deliberately spying on his fiance. And so it's really about how all of these devices can complicate the ways we interpret information, and then lead to digital paranoia, when they can lead to a feeling of being unsafe. And of course, we get these devices to make us feel safe, and also for our convenience, and how they can actually have the opposite effect. And so that's really the genesis, what the book is about, the themes in it. But I always try and do this. I always go for what is unnerving me, and then how can I explore this in a story. So, for example, in my prior book, which is One Little Secret, what was concerning me was the friendships that people make in small towns, right? And it's funny. I remember when I was in my 20s, it was all about, does this person share my interests, and all of these things that kind of made you feel bonded to a person. And then all of a sudden I have kids, and they go to school, and it's like, oh, our kids are in the same class. We are friends now. And in some cases, we really are friends. Those are great people, some of my dear friends. And in other cases, it just means you're the person I regularly share small talk with. And if we feel very bonded because we have these things where our kids are in the same class and they have the same assignments, but how well do we really know each other? And so my kind of concerns with that led me to write a book in which these three couples, who really only know each other because their kids are friends and they've had a lot of backyard small talk barbecues, decide they're going to go on vacation together. And a person shows up dead, and one of the people in the house that they're all in together, and they have to figure out who did it. So it's a little bit of an Agatha Christie style closed door mystery, or locked room mystery, as we say. But what really was the genesis was, how well do I know these people that have now in my mind become so close to me, yet our conversations are really in this very small sphere. And so that was One Little Secret. When I did The Widower's Wife, I skipped a book. When I did Her Three Lives before that, I'm going in reverse order. Her Three Lives tells the story of an insane writer, which I swear was not me. But what was concerning to me was where story ideas come from, and how much we borrow from the people in our lives, and whether that's fair to them. And so what I was wanting to write a story where this writer is unconsciously borrowing from events and people in her own life. And then every other chapter is the story she's telling, and kind of the fun for the reader is figuring out how much she's taking, where she's inventing, where she's not inventing, which is the key to a murder that's actually in the writer's own life. And so in reading it, you kind of have to figure that out. And it's this kind of it's a twofer. It's a two stories in one. But it was because I was concerned about my new profession and how much I was borrowing. And I got to also learn a lot about how our subconscious works for that kind of story, which was a lot of fun. And in a prior book, The Widower's Wife, that really came from my fear of cruises, because I went on a cruise, and all I thought about the whole time was, if I jumped off, could I swim to an island? Like, if something happened and this became a Titanic situation, or I just needed to leave, like, could I escape? And the reason why was because I was on a Disney cruise with a 2-year-old who decided that week to cut her teeth. And I didn't have Orajel, and there was only so much whiskey I was comfortable giving a 2-year-old. And so I realized, so the whole time I'm sitting there going, oh my goodness, could I possibly get anywhere where there would be a real pharmacy? And how would I do this? And that became the genesis of that story. But I like this idea of writing what scares us and writing what interests us and then really delving into that. And also how I do that is I was a journalist for over 10 years. And so I really have no problem with going over to strangers and saying, tell me about that. How does it work? And the great thing, if you're a writer, is a lot of times you can go over to anyone and say, hey, I'm writing a book. I would love to know how brain surgery works. And there'll be a brain surgeon who must make a bajillion dollars an hour when he's at work, right? But is so interested to kind of share their career with somebody who is genuinely wants to know, that they will do it. So I've had books where I had one, which was One Little Secret, where I wanted a female detective. So I just called around in New Jersey police departments and said, hey, I found the one that had the most female detectives. And I said, hey, would any of your detectives be willing to let me shadow them for a day? Would they let me talk to them? And it's amazing. I was very lucky that I had a detective, Shauna Maldonado, that said, yeah, come on by. I'll show you the jails. I'll tell you what I do. And you just learn such amazing things. Like this, none of this made it into my book, but I took a lot of the mannerisms and the way that this detective thought about her career, and I put it into a character in One Little Secret. But one of the things she said during our discussion was that she, as a female detective, often gets the sexual assault cases and the cases involving children, because women who have been victimized, usually it's by a man, feel very intimidated when a large guy walks in with like a gun on his hip. You can understand they shut down. And so if you have a person who they identify more with, they're more likely to say something. And for children, there's a reason why you tell kids who, if you ever lose anyone, go find a mom. It's because kids, A, feel more comfortable with talking to a mom, and B, that people feel more comfortable, I guess, giving them that advice. So as a result, the female detectives often get cases involving children, because children have been kind of trained, maybe unconsciously by their own parents, to seek out other women when they have problems. And so she was telling me this story, which sticks with me to this day, where she was interviewing these kids who had been in foster care, and the child said to her that they had been being abused by their foster parent, and had real detailed stories and all of this stuff. And so the protocol is you take all the kids, foster and non-foster, out of the household, and you interview them all, and you separate them from the parents, and you figure it out. And she said that at the time, she's just like taking breaks to go cry in the bathroom because this kid's story is just horrific. And she thinks this kid's already been through so much and now is put in this foster care situation, how we failed him as a society, and, just feeling this horrific guilt. And meanwhile, her boss, who was a little bit more experienced with this stuff, said, I'm just not sure he's telling the truth. And at the time she was kind of appalled, like, well, this kid's gone through so much trauma. And they end up running the case and realized that the abuse couldn't have happened because the father was a trucker and was actually off on deliveries. He wasn't even in the state at the time, and they had all the records and everything. And then when they finally bring the kid back in, they talk to him about, well, why did you lie? I mean, obviously it's torn this family apart. Their actual, their biological kids have also been taken from them during this time. And the child said, I thought if my foster parents were ruled unfit, I would get to go back to my real parents, right? Which was just so heartbreaking, but also reminds you that, as a writer at least, that every quote unquote villain, everybody that does something wrong, is doing it in their mind for the right reasons, right? And sometimes those reasons are selfishly, they're to protect themselves. Sometimes those reasons are because they have loved ones that they're trying to protect or trying to get back to. But every villain is always a hero in their own mind. They're always doing it for the right reasons. And so, I try to also bring that to my work, in understanding that I can never I don't do serial killers. I don't write about the crazy person that's just, only satisfied, if they do the devil's work. That's not interesting to me. I want to write about people that are given a unique backstory and set of problems, and then are forced to confront things that cause them to do things, to make mistakes. And then those mistakes compound because mistakes they make lead to consequences that they are particularly ill-equipped to deal with, right? And then that spirals. And I think particularly in psychological thrillers, that's what you're going for, is you're trying to go for characters where anybody could be both the protagonist or the antagonist. You kind of don't know until the end. And you're trying to create characters where their flaws are believable enough that you are still willing to hang with them through the whole story and still feel something for them, but knowing that their flaws are significant enough that they could have broken, that they could be responsible for something bad. And that's what I try to bring to all my work. And so that's kind of my take on writing and my take on my work. And I am happy to always answer any questions, or I can read from my books, whatever you guys feel like.
I had a couple of questions that popped up. If anybody here has any questions from anything we've heard so far, please feel free to leave it in the chat. But I figured I'd ask you a couple, and maybe we could do like an excerpt or two if you wanted. But one thing that came to mind for me is when you're explaining this kind of concept of like writing from what you fear. I, as I think a lot of us have been learning a lot about, mental health and all those kinds of topics over this last year. And, one thing they talk about is this concept of intrusive thoughts and kind of giving them a space in your mind and, like trying to shut them down doesn't work. Like, you just kind of have to accept them and let them pass. And in a way, like this method you're talking about is almost this to the nth degree, like exploring this kind of like fear fully and completely. And I was curious if that had any kind of effect for you writing it, if it like created this kind of cathartic feeling of like, okay, that's like, if it either like kind of like relieved you of some of the anxieties of it, or maybe even just got you thinking of it like, wow, it's kind of interesting when you think of it in a completely different way.
Absolutely. In fact, what I hope is that my fears are not unique, and that so when I experience that catharsis, my reader does too. And we feel like we've gone through something together and gotten through it on the other end, and we feel better. That's my hope. But yes, I'm kind of inviting you into my therapy sessions. I had a therapist once where he used to read my books every time I came out with one, and he would go, and I'm like, I know.
Like dog hearing it.
I get
You're like, oh, that's something to bring up next time.
That's right. And he once said to me, he said, the reason why you have an anxiety disorder and I can't give you anything is because your career would suffer. And I'm like, I do realize this. I know. You can't spoil the artist. You have to give them their demons. And so, but yeah.
That's definitely an interesting theory. I'm sure a lot of therapists that are dealing with artists find.
It's true. Don't fix us. No, very few artists are happy. But but I also think that the thing with stories is what draws us to people, what makes us feel that we have an intimate connection with them, I often think is when we relate to their problems. It's very difficult to relate to perfection, right? When somebody seems like they have it all together. I mean, it's not that we're not happy for them. We're not jealous. We're just like, oh, okay, good for you. But you feel like you don't really know that person. I think what allows us to know someone or know a character is when they have a problem that we go, oh, I also have gone through something like that. And this is how I got out of it, or this is how I'm trying to, or this is what I'm still struggling with. And that's what really draws us into characters. Because we want to know. We're like, well, how are you going to fix it? Like, I know how I did it, or I know how I didn't do it, right? Like, and so I think we're always looking for characters who are struggling with something, and then we're trying to have them meet some sort of resolution at the end. And that's kind of the dramatic arc. A very simplified version of the dramatic arc is that there's a problem and there's a solution and there's a journey to finding that solution, right? And in thrillers, there's a problem and there's a solution, and then there's a twist. So often the twist is that you have this character that thinks they're on a heroic journey to finding the solution, but then they have these flaws that might mean that their idea of where they should be going is not correct, right? And sometimes some of the tension is that as the reader, we realize that where they're going is not a good place, even though they think that that's where they need to be. And then we have this wanting to kind of like reach through the book and tell them, no, you don't realize the killer's behind the closet. Like, what are you doing walking around, right? And I think that's what draws us into books, is that sense of danger, particularly when we know that someone has a blind spot and we can see where that blind spot is. And now we're watching this person navigate through the story with that blind spot.
Yeah, and I think books offer a lot of opportunity to kind of capture that blind spot in ways that feel a little more believable. I know a lot of times in film, like it kind of feels a little cheaper sometimes when you're like getting like, oh, this perspective that somebody else is getting there, but you feel that kind of that being framed in like that. But books, you can explore that so in such a fleshed out kind of nuanced way. And talking about different perspectives, you introduced, a lot of the technological fears that you talked about, and even to a degree, like the community, like the small town community. I'm curious if those elements of your work over the last year, with all of the goings on with in the wake of the pandemic, obviously our relationships to technology have changed for a lot of people, become a lot more constant than a lot of people would like. And our relationships to even our small communities may have changed. I'm curious, is there anything over this kind of last year that had you looking at some of the things you'd already written and being like, it feels so different now. It feels like so, like if I wrote it today, it might not be like exactly the same.
It's interesting. I think if anything, it's become heightened. The great thing about having anxiety is you worry about things in the future. So, when I was writing this book, Her 3 Lives, a lot of the dehumanization that comes with constantly only interacting with people on screens was something that's explored in the book, because my main character has a traumatic brain injury. They're wearing a helmet. They're not allowed to go outside. And it becomes, so their way of experiencing the world is really through screens and through looking at their security cameras and interpreting this small window of the world, how they think they should. And so, and that creates a lot of anxiety. It creates misinterpretations. It creates a lot of paranoia. And I think we've seen that to the nth degree now that we've all been on these screens. There were these articles written about the Ring doorbell cams, where people got so used to kind of having packages and they're delivered and they talk to the people through the doorbell camera, that people started to like see neighbors that were walking down the street with like their dog and reporting it to the police because they're like, that person looks suspicious. And this is not something that we would do if we could open the door and go, hey, and somebody waves back and you go, oh, they're fine. But people do it because of this separation that we have. And so I think that I hit upon some things that became kind of even more true. I also think one thing Her 3 Lives explores is the tension between social media and what we put out there publicly and who we actually are privately, and kind of the blurring of these lines. And so my main character, who does have this blog, is she has a persona and she puts it out there, and she's very kind of flirty and fun. And there are aspects of that are who the character really is, but it creates problems in that, you're not quite sure if somebody who's become attracted to her in this particular way now believes they have a relationship with this person that they really don't. And so, which I think is something that we all worry about with social media, right? And that you have a lot of social media friends, right? And sometimes they were your real friends at some point. They were your high school pals, or elementary school, or them on some level, or they were your old neighbor's cousin who ended up reaching out. But next thing you know, they're like commenting on, your wedding anniversary. And you start to feel like, oh, well, thank you. That's great that you wish me well. And you start to feel a closeness. And is that closeness real, or is it based on what somebody's projecting onto you? And so I think that's another one of these tensions. And also the other thing that I think is going to be explored, not just in literature, but we're all seeing it, is just how quickly things escalate when people don't have face-to-face conversations. When people are commenting on social media and they're giving in their 2 cents, people feel free to say things and that they would never say to someone face-to-face, and there can be kind of mob mentality about it. And so I think that I don't know, maybe it's a subject for even another book, but that's something that scares the Jesus out of me. Is I mean, I'm constantly with my kids, like, don't post anything. You never know how something's going to be interpreted, and right, because they're 9 and 12, and I'm worried about like them doing some TikTok dance that 5 years later becomes inappropriate for some reason, and they thought they were just moving, or I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
So I think that there is this nervousness about how quickly something can go viral for the wrong reasons. And I think a lot of stuff does go viral, because it appeals to sometimes our lesser natures. It's somebody that falls spectacularly off their skis, or it's like this, right? There's a lot of this stuff is things that we kind of shouldn't laugh about, but do. It's that, what was it? America's Funniest Home Videos, but to the nth degree. And so I do think that we worry about it. And, I was a technology reporter at Business Week for years, and at the kind of the dawn of social media, which really dates me, when we were kind of deciding whether MySpace, Facebook, or Yahoo would win the social media wars, right? That's when I was covering it. And that was mostly like, they were like, put a kid on it, because they were busy covering public companies that were making investors money. And so I got to kind of see this stuff from the beginning and see how it's evolved. And I think that's created a level of comfort, but also unease that I explore in my writing. And I think the other big thing, in addition to our relationship with technology, that's going to become more and more salient in contemporary literature, is also our I think our relationship with oh geez, I might have just lost my train of thought. I think also, excuse me, I think that our relationship with each other through technology, and also politics. I think people are going to be wondering how salient politics will be in our lives. I think it used to be where political conversations were somewhat taboo. And now, I don't know about other people, but I almost feel guilty if something happens and I don't comment on it, because I feel like if I don't say something, I'm kind of tacitly approving of something that happened, right? Which is a lot of pressure. And so then you wonder, how does that affect relationships? Because I think a lot of our relationships, not to say they're shallow, but they're based in spheres. And I think that that's what's missing from technology, is this idea that you have some friends that you talk about, let's say, the kids with, and some friends that you talk about food with, and you have these different spheres of your existence, and politics and family, and now it all gets meshed together. And how do we navigate relationships when we kind of have this perfect information? So,
I mean, yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of elements at play here, and how they interact with their day-to-day lives. And it's really interesting seeing those kind of play into a psychological thriller, that extra level. It kind of really adds a lot of potential perspectives to things. And speaking of Poetry Lives, I was wondering, would you like to share an excerpt from the book with us?
Oh, yes, please. Thanks for asking.
Awesome.
You know what? So I always struggle, because my chapters tend to be a little bit longer. And so sometimes I feel like, because I get tired of hearing myself speak, that I kind of cut it off. And then people are like, where was the cliffhanger of that? And I'm like, it was there. It was just at the end of the chapter.
Yeah.
So I'm going to read the chapter from Jade, but which is the second chapter, because the first chapter, which I do think is kind of exciting, but that's where the robbery happens and he's hit over the head. So I'm going to start the chapter after that, mostly because it doesn't involve violence, so that I'm not reading. And I might say yada 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 at one point. Don't worry, it's good. I'm skipping over. I'm yada yadaing the good stuff, as they say in Seinfeld, but I'm doing it for expediency's sake. Okay, chapter 2. Pride goeth before destruction. The proverb was one of Abigail Thompson's favorites. Growing up, Jade had heard her mother mutter it many a time after hearing that misfortune had befallen a seemingly upstanding individual. To her mom's credit, Abigail never uttered it with the smug satisfaction of some of the other church women, as though she'd personally warned the poor soul that his luck would change if he didn't show God more gratitude. She tended to say it in the same tenor as an apology. Abigail regretted that heaven's standards were so impossible, but it wasn't for men to judge the laws of the Lord. The Savior didn't punish without reason. If tragedy struck a decent family, then in Abigail's mind, Jesus must have determined them insufficiently thankful for their blessings. Jade had little use for Proverbs 16:18 or any other biblical victim blaming. As far as she was concerned, the universe meted out vengeance with the precision of an atom bomb. Storms leveled cities. Men and women were murdered, raped, babies died in utero. There were myriad reasons, and chief among them was being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But prayer, or lack thereof, wasn't one. She'd learned that lesson at age 7 when she'd been a true believer, and she was certain that what had happened a week earlier had nothing to do with the divine or justice. There'd be no convincing Abigail of that, though. Jade could feel her mother's disapproving gaze boring into her back as she draped a bright orange cloth over the kitchen table. In her peripheral vision, she could see Abigail's pursed lips above the newspaper held roughly in her hands. Part of Jade wanted to tell her mother that she had no right to judge at the moment. Abigail was not the one with a fiancé in the hospital. Abigail had not been attacked. But Jade had long learned that fighting with a woman who believed in preordination was pointless. Jade slipped into the neighboring kitchen. She grabbed a white plate from the cupboard and brought it beside the still sizzling cast iron skillet. The air was saturated with the smells of frying oil and fish, reminding her of Lenten Fridays as a child. She grabbed a spatula from a basket beside the stove, slipped it under the small snapper, and transferred the fish to her plate. Scales shone pink around the snapper's gelatinous eye and glowering mouth. Jade's stomach twisted with sudden revulsion. She pulled back the fridge door and dipped her head inside, sucking in the cold air to settle her stomach. Ever since the attack, the weirdest things set off waves of nausea. Jade pressed the heel of her hand into her flat stomach until the feeling subsided. She then yanked the pickling jar from the fridge's top shelf and shut the door. Twisting off the metal lid released the trapped fumes of fermenting Scotch bonnet peppers. Jade's eyes watered as she grabbed a spoon from a drawer beside the stove and scooped out several slices of carrots, bell peppers, and ginger root, spreading them like jam across the top of the fish. Even with her blurred vision, she could tell the plate would look pretty on the orange backdrop. She carried her culinary painting to the table and placed it in the center of the fabric, taking a moment to admire how the cloth's color highlighted the carrots atop the fish. She returned to the kitchen for a fork and a knife and a deep purple napkin and the flowers that she intended to take to the hospital later, a lavish arrangement with 2 bird of paradise blooms emerging from a nest of violet orchids. As she staged the area around the plate, Jade could feel her mother's anger intensifying, heating the air between them like a blast from an opened oven. She tried to ignore it, focusing only on the still life framed in her iPhone screen and the sumptuousness of the food at the photo center. The pictures looked appetizing, although a tad too brassy thanks to the afternoon light streaming through her mother's west-facing window. The right filter would tone down the color. Jade grabbed the fork and carefully peeled a morsel off the fish's side. She stabbed it along with a bright yellow pepper, and then brought the lot up to her coral-painted mouth, smiling as if unaware of the cell phone camera clicking in her extended left hand. Her mother jostled the newspaper. "Sweetheart, for shame." Jade placed the bite back on the plate. "It's been nearly a week. If I don't put up a post soon, I'll lose followers." "Lose them then." The paper smacked against the table. "Your husband-to-be is in a coma." Abigail leaned forward in her seat, thick biceps bulging over her folded hands, an arm wrestler waiting for a challenger. Her hair was pulled off her face in a low ponytail. The style, coupled with the fact that Abigail lacked a single wrinkle on her walnut skin, made her appear to be Jade's older peer rather than her parent. Jade placed her phone on the table. "You don't think I know where he is?" Abigail stiffened. Jade reminded herself of the respect due the woman who had birthed and raised her alone, regardless of how absurdly judgmental she might be acting. She lowered her voice. I've been there plenty since it happened. Greg doesn't know that, though. He's not responsive, and he may never become so. You want me to hold a round-the-clock vigil until the doctors say it's time to make a decision? Jade's eyes watered more, a drizzle threatening a true shower. She pushed the pepper-covered fish farther from her face. I can't lose my livelihood, too. Her speech did little to soften her mother's expression. Abigail gestured toward the plate. So you're gonna share a picture of you smiling beside an Escovitch fish? Her mother's accent, muted from 4 decades in Brooklyn, became more prominent when she was annoyed. Abigail would have slipped into a Jamaican patois, Jade bet, had the recent home invasion not demanded some extra show of sympathy for her child. Abigail Thompson would never see the blog as anything other than her daughter's indulgence. As a nurse, her mom believed that the value one provided others should be physically measurable, obvious in the reduced fever of the infected patient or the stitched arm of the fall victim. Jade provided enjoyment calculated by an amorphous formula involving clicks and time spent on pages. Clicks could add up to real money, though. The blog brought in $6,000 a month in advertising, enough to support her as she continued to work out how a BFA in design could yield steady contract work. In her mother's defense, Jade supposed that she'd played down the site's importance in the beginning, dismissing it as a hobby. In truth, Jade had always hoped to build an audience. When she'd installed the advertising widget on her site, she'd silently planned to gain enough of a following to pay off her student loans, a sum that had remained undented by bartending and sporadic modeling gigs. Jade suspected that her mother secretly thought the whole enterprise sinful, albeit in a venal fashion. In her mother's eyes, Life in Color profited off of bragging and frivolity. It probably encouraged idolatry by diverting attention from God to home decor and other vain pursuits. You honestly think telling the world about your lunch is a good use of your time when your fiancé is eating from a tube? The words stung. Fresh tears welled in Jade's eyes, along with a recent image of Greg. His head bandaged and his neck braced, the plastic tube ran into his open mouth beneath thick white tape hiding his thin lips. His skin, always pale, had the powdery appearance of albinism. Jade glanced at the graying fish on the plate. Whatever morsel of hunger she'd felt disintegrated. Why don't you have it? I can't eat. Okay, so then we skip forward a little bit and the hospital calls. So she hung up and slipped the phone into her back pocket. Abigail stood in front of her wearing an unrecognizable expression, worry perhaps, but mixed with another feeling that flared her nostrils. Greg is conscious. Abigail clapped her hands together like she was calling for lightning. Oh, praise Jesus. Oh, dear God, thank you, thank you. The clapping took on a rhythm of a church hymn. Oh, dear God in heaven, thank you. Jesus, thank you, we thank you. The gratitude chorus followed Jade around the apartment as she grabbed her purse and car keys. It grew louder, covering for the congregant failing to join in. Jade's own voice shriveled in her throat. She'd read stories about people who woke from comas. Some couldn't walk or had to relearn to talk. Some came back fundamentally different, the spark of their intelligence permanently snuffed by the blow that had failed to kill them, their thought patterns and personality irrevocably altered. Would Greg be the same man? Would he be injured but capable of getting better? Or would he be reduced to some childlike state, needing her help to tie his shoes and wash himself? When she'd said yes to Greg's proposal, Jade had imagined herself swearing before a priest and God to love and honor him for the rest of his life, come what may. But she'd also fervently believed in probability. 6 days earlier, her betrothed had been a handsome, fit man, barely in his 50s, who ran triathlons and had enough income to afford top-of-the-line healthcare. The smart money had been on Greg's not becoming an invalid anytime soon. It was why he'd been able to obtain such a large life insurance policy. Jade mumbled something to her mother about calling later and hurried out the door. Her fiancé was alive, but she didn't know whose prayers had been answered. So that is a bit from chapter 2. And what was so much fun for me writing that is I am half Jamaican, half Irish. I'm a Jamaican citizen and an American citizen. So I was able to draw a little bit upon my own culture, which was fun. In fact, upon both of them, because Greg is American and Jade is Jamaican American. So I got to put in a little patois and a little bit about Jamaican culture in there, which I think is fun. And and actually, if you get the audiobook, the woman that does the voice really does a good Jamaican accent, and I'm picky because I know what it's like when somebody speaks it and it doesn't sound right, so it bothers me. So I appreciate that she did a really good job. So. Oh, I think
sorry about that. That's excellent. And I obviously little details like that, and that kind of like authenticity of your experience shines through. It really adds a lot of dimensionality to the story. You know, you really get the sense that you're kind of like observing like a real scene, which of course serves just to make everything much more impactful when you know the twists come and the heavy action comes in. It feels a lot more painful when the people feel so palpably real. But that was fantastic. Really great passage. And you know, I think we could all look forward to reading more like that in the book, Her Three Lives. That's really exciting.
Yeah, good. And yeah, it's so much fun because, see, I'm a big believer in that you have to write what you know, but also write what you're willing to learn about, right?
Mhm.
So, because the idea is everybody gets nervous about writing cultures that don't, you know, that don't belong, maybe that they don't have intimate experience with. And I think the problem is if you do it well, nobody has a problem with it, right? It's when you do it poorly. So the key is you have to be sure you're doing it well. And so the easiest way to do that, obviously, is to draw upon your own cultural experience, because you've grown up with it. So you have however many years of essentially studying it and picking it up through osmosis. So it feels authentic when it's on the page. But I think the key with some of that debate is just, you don't ever want to caricaturize someone's experience. You know, I would never want to write a character where somebody reads that and they go, oh my goodness, that looks like the characters that were in blaxploitation films.
Mhm.
Or that I've written a homosexual character in a way where they seem cartoonish and not like a real person. You want to be able to make sure that if you're willing to write outside your own experience, you have done the work, that you have interviewed the right people, that you have absorbed it, and then you have run it by people where you're pretty sure that this is going to be authentic. Because there's just, it's bad enough when you write an unrelatable character, but if you write a character that seems like a caricature, that's the death knell, right? So
Yeah, I think that that real kind of experience is something that a lot of people have definitely been craving this past year, and I think it'll be really enjoyable to like read more works that are kind of giving you that intimate feeling, even if it is you know, something like wrapped in kind of a more intense package.
yeah, and you know, it's interesting because also with this book, sometimes, so there's this scene where the spouse uses a drone to spy on his wife, and my husband got a drone just for fun, you know, and he was definitely antagonizing the children, like for fun, driving it up to their bedroom window and having it hover, and you know, showing our whole house. And I started to realize, like, oh, this is funny now because we're all in on the joke, but like, how uncomfortable would that be to be followed around by a drone, right? I'm sure celebrities, this must have like added to their cell phone fear, you know, multiple fold. They could be walking around and TMZ could be there with a drone, like following them in Brooklyn. Yeah, so, and I had another experience where, you know, the Find My iPhone app, which I don't know if anybody has it, but it's lovely in that when you lose your phone, which I do multiple times a day, you can basically use another device to set off an alarm, and your phone will alert you to where it is, much like a baby cry, and you can go pick up your precious device. The thing is, if you're in a family, like you can be tracked this way pretty easily. And I had this experience where I was in a bar and I was supposed to meet up with my husband and we couldn't find each other, and he set off my Find My iPhone. And so all of a sudden I'm like in the bar and I just start like alerting, like a fire alarm, you know, and it was embarrassing, but it served its purpose. He definitely found me. And I thought to myself, like, oh, again, funny because I'm in on the joke, but like, how awful would that be if you didn't want to be found?
Just a little bit like, you're lucky you're so nice.
When I did that, I looked at him, I'm like, you know, that's weird, right? And he's like, but it's so convenient.
That's wonderful. I think that's given us a really good look into the book. I'm not seeing any more questions from anybody. Did you have any like remarks that you like final remarks you wanted to share?
No,
For
just
the
thank you
writing?
so much for having me. It's been a pleasure chatting with all of you, and thanks for listening to me go on about my anxiety and serving as my virtual therapist. It's always very nice, and I don't have to pay someone $200 an hour, so that's great. And, and so, yeah, and but I do hope that I joke a lot about it, but I do think that that's one of the things that people that read thrillers love, right? Is that we get to be a little bit scared, we get to be nervous for the character, and at the end, hopefully, we all share in that catharsis. It's over and it's resolved, and we feel like we have that calm and that understanding of the problem, and we've thought through the solutions, and it makes us all feel a little bit better. It's like a glass of wine, but in literary form. So,
That's a great tagline.
thank you.
Well, thank you very much for sharing the book with us. And yeah, absolutely, everybody, please look out for her 3 lives. That was author Cate Holahan. We thank you very much for being here. We thank you, all of you in the audience, for watching. We hope you all have a great night. Thank you again, Cate Holahan, for sharing your story with us.
Right.
Wonderful. I will go ahead and end the call here. Thank you all for joining us. I hope you all have a great night.
Yes. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.